All right, so we're a little bit later with the top 20 albums of June this year because I have been busy with other things. I'm working on a lot of other projects, and basically, um, I've been playing Diablo 4 quite a bit, and I'll probably review that at some point, I guess. I don't know what there is to say about that, but basically, uh, I've gotten some strange communication from individuals this month, which I didn't appreciate, and I sort of took a step back and decided to ease up on some of my writing about music because um, I felt like I had other things to focus on. But really, I think the second day of the month, the album of the month had arrived. Thantaxifas, Hive Mind Narcosis is the album of the month for sure. It is a well, I wouldn't say it was the easiest pick. There's a couple of really great albums out this month, but this is just the point of mastery, the rare good stuff, the record that we were all waiting for. And the album art is just whatever, but the music is not. And it was probably the most entertaining record overall of the month for my taste. Easily one of the more interesting black metal records of the year, and generally just a point of mastery for this Canadian group in terms of showing what they can still do, showing what they do, but pushing it to another level that is mostly presented without waste or excess. And so, very impressed with this. I think it is easily the highest recommendation for me over this month. That isn't totally informed by exuberant fandom. So, definitely worth checking out. So not far from the number one slot is Passeisme's Alternates, their second full-length album, and certainly probably one of the better melodic black metal albums of the month in terms of presenting a little bit of that sort of chivalric neoclassical style in their own fantastically um, mindset, which is just brilliantly presented overall. Everything from the album art to the production values being a little bit more clear, to their songwriting being a little bit more relaxed at times, giving moments to breathe and enjoy the just the impressive level of detail here that's just above and beyond most anything else you'll hear this year in black metal, especially melodic black metal, which doesn't feel like it's overly referential of the past or uh, too heavily, too heavy of an emulation of something. So, coming from a sort of a flat, kind of out of nowhere Russian band with some death metal musicians involved, this is a pretty surprising release and definitely something that I've listened to more and more since I reviewed it. Now, the score will probably go up over time. The final say of that is always the end of the year when I present the top 50 or 100, whatever it ends up being. So this is probably sitting a little bit higher than 80 out of 100. So that will evolve over time, and we'll see where it goes from there. So the return of Hell Witch involves re-recordings of old songs, official versions of classics, which we've only heard on demos before. It's a death thrash metal record from a band that had been around since the advent of death metal, and certainly one that has contributed to technical thrash metal. And I have a lot of passion for technical thrash metal and death thrash metal, and I think this is an essential band. Um, but I will concede that this is these lists are not always just all about my taste, and putting this at number one would sort of do less justice to bands that maybe got more listening time out of me this month, even if this is probably one of my more high rated releases of the month. For my own taste and what I will probably listen to the most over the next 5 years, this is probably higher up there because I'm such a fan of Hell Witch and their whole discography. I've got the box set, I've got a lot of the old stuff. That's kind of the band that started my Wild Rags collection and all that. So this is an important band to me. But I could concede that, if you want something that's at least a little bit objective, this is a very much a niche thing for people who love death thrash metal and 80s death metal in particular. So I think it's an essential band that you should check out, and that's one of the reasons why it's high up here, and it's just part of my general fandom.
We're supposed to be jokes.
Denmark's Ultra of Oblivion are, I would say, probably one of the better epic doom examples of epic heavy doom metal out there today. It's good to hear that they're putting out new material here pretty soon, and I use the word new loosely because Burning Memories is quite an old recording that has never been released yet, and it is all new to us. It is all chronologically presented, and the newest material that we've heard from this band comes from, I think, 2017 or so, as this stuff sort of comes off the back of their last full-length album, which was a few years old by the time it released in, I think, 2019 or so. So, if you're a fan of like Solitude Aeternus and the possibilities that that band opened up beyond Candlemass in terms of adding some of those like late 80s thrash influences and whatnot, this is the record for you. This is the band for you in terms of presenting epic heavy metal, which has more than just the early 80s in mind. So definitely check that out because this is one of my favorite releases, one of the catchier releases I'm going to cover here on this top 20. So I wasn't all that sure about Coffin Mulch. This is a Scottish death metal band who've just put out their debut full length. And when I first heard this group, they put out this EP that was just okay. It seemed to be trying to do death doom metal. It kind of had like a Swedish sound to it, and I wasn't really sure what the band was all about. And it was probably because I didn't pay much attention to their demo. This is very much an old style, it's like Swedish death metal record in a lot of respects, but there's also quite a bit of Autopsy influence, early Autopsy influence in their sound, and Spectral Intercession leans into that. It leans into the earliest, or let's call it the late 80s Swedish death metal style in truth, and it makes for like this impressive kind of grinding, just enjoyable death metal record. It's very well rounded. It's got great songwriting, plenty of riffs, and a unique drum sound, which sort of helps it stand out from a lot of what else is out there right now. I think this is just a record I just enjoyed. Like I love sitting with this record, and I'll see how that evolves over time. But over the last month or two, it's stuck in mind. And it's got this kind of wild album cover too, which is I've not yet wrapped my brain around what I'm looking at. So. We'll get there someday. Vama Marga is the third full-length from Adversum, which is a German funeral death doom metal band out of Norden, Germany, and one that they've definitely been like a deep underground cut for the last couple records. They started out aiming for maybe a darker shade of funeral doom, and then they eventually leaned into funeral death doom because that was kind of the obvious course. And now they've included the current keyboardist for Evoken into their ranks, and this has immediately sophisticated their sound, and frankly, it sounds a bit like earlier Evoken in a lot of ways. And for me, that's perfect. I mean, like for me, I just love this record because the use of the keyboards is very strong. The atmosphere has quadrupled for this record. The riff style is still not quite fully there. The compositions are lacking in some respects in terms of tightness and just presenting matching the atmosphere. But overall, this was a very entertaining funeral doom death doom metal record, which just impressed me overall. I listened to it far more times than I expected to, and yeah. for all the praise I have for bands like Dead Congregation and certainly Embrace of Thorns and all that. I've never really had a chance to fully sort of gush over Burial Hordes, which is sort of a contemporary of a lot of those groups, and certainly one that brings a unique take on black and death metal on each of their releases, and this one is just particularly strong. I think they've done a certain thing on the last few records, and this one amplifies that touch. It finds kind of the right render. It's got great album art. This is kind of the full package deal from this band so far. While it loses some of the sort of dissonance found on other records, while it presents something a little bit more feasibly abstract and pretty interesting overall. So there's still an emergent bestial feeling they've injected into the sound, which I feel balances well with that abstraction to the point where the sort of post-apocalyptic scene that they're depicting is really well represented overall. So I had a great time with this record and would definitely recommend it. So when a mini LP like this makes it on the list, it's usually because I just had a great time with the record. I think that this is one of the more unique things from the sort of barbarous side of old school death metal and its return, especially in the hands of Californians, where we get something that is certainly referential of Impetigo and early Autopsy and sort of the point where death metal, death doom, a little bit of the weirding grindcore side of things all mixes together, and they use pitch shifted vocals. They've got a couple of strange samples on here. It's exactly what it looks like, and part of the reason why I enjoy it is because it is referential, and the other part is just because they're doing a really good job of making a collage of all of it that I enjoy. So, pretty interesting band, and I'm excited for their next full length. Nemesis is the debut album from Nemesis, which is a black metal band that is somewhat avant-garde and atmospheric with some unique influences, which it comes from a musician who's better known for some of the sort of heavy psychedelic throwback bands that he's in, and this is just an impressive sort of outsider feeling black metal record, which is both homebrewed and sophisticated and unique in its rhythms, and it's well worth checking out if you're interested in something that's avant-garde, a little bit amateurish in some respects, but very impressive in others that kind of make up for it. So very much worth checking out. Into the Outer Wilderness might be the umpteenth record from Grafitnir that is in this melodic black metal style that is very specifically Swedish, and that's kind of enough of an in for a lot of people. It's very riff-oriented, the guitar work is phenomenal, and the production values have only improved for this band over the years, and they're at a very much a high point at this time. But it just comes down to the fact that this is a very tuneful, memorable, and aggressive record, and it's very orthodox in its style. So otherwise, there's a little bit of a Norwegian influence on some of these songs, a very classic feeling to the back half of the record, and it makes the whole thing feel very well-rounded and one of their better records overall. Aborted from Reality is the second full-length album from Static Abyss, and the second in a row. They put out an Autopsy record in between, but this is Chris Reifert of the, obviously very well known for his work in death metal, and Greg Wilkinson, who is obviously very well known for his work in sludge metal, death metal, and noise and many other things. He's a great engineer, and their work has become refined. This is a different setting for the studio. It's a very different sounding album in terms of the recording, as well as a little bit of a refinement of what was cool about the first record. I don't think they overthought it. I think they went with what felt good, and it turns out that it's a pretty fun record to listen to with a really weird atmosphere, and it's a cool thing, and I'm glad they're developing it at a sort of hyper pace, because it seems to be paying off with just unusual atmosphere, and some great performances from Reifert, who I just always enjoy. So Comme des Revenants parmi les Ruines is the first full length from Sacre Noir, a Quebecois black metal band, which features members of Monarch and Fortress. So that alone is enough reason to pick it up. You kind of know what it sounds like because those two people are involved in it. They have their own raw style of melodicism that is well loved, and whenever they work together, it's a fine result. If you're just a Fortress fan, this is maybe a little bit more Monarch-esque in its recording values. It's old school leaning feeling, and there's a couple of 80s black metal inspired songs on here which really stand out. I really enjoyed this record. I think everything these guys put out and everything this label puts out are kind of my style. I really enjoy it, but this leans a little bit more classic, and it just caught my ear, and I listened to it quite a bit this month.
Strength and will over resignation.
So Determined to Strike from Sarmat is an interesting study on how you can bring jazz fusion into death metal in a more aggressive way. And I don't mean that their music is more aggressive than the usual sort of technical progressive death metal fused with jazz, but this more aggressively fuses actual jazz traits, movements, and interest in terms of its playful rhythmic touch and its extremism. There's a little bit more of the vocals are very expressive and unique. The use of horns and brass in general is an interesting touch. It's no surprise that they're friends of Imperial Triumphant, and there's a lot that went into this record's feeling that is not only just emergent, but it's uniquely expressive for anything that's touched jazz and death metal at the same time. So not necessarily the creeping noir style, but the more frantic and connective form of jazz approaching metal. And I think it's something they really should expand upon ad infinitum. So check that out if you're interested in something that's just different. And it really struck me this month that it's a little bit all over the place, but in a good way. Hellerune's Devil's Death and Dark Arts is kind of an easy pickup, a really obvious standout. The more you sit with it, it is a semi-melodic, or I would just say kind of a melodic black metal band from a fellow who's a quick study on classic Norwegian melodicism, a little bit of modern melodicism, and how that can apply to his own style, which is aggressive, dark, and charismatic above all else. If you take one look at that and you think of Take, I think that's reasonable, and I think that's sort of an element of his influence that he kind of wears on his sleeve, both in terms of the visuals and the music itself. It isn't quite black and roll or progressive in that sense, but you could see his songwriting is aiming for that level of sophistication and vision. This record is a little bit all over the place in terms of its style moving around, and the second half has a couple of spotty moments. But overall, it's not the most original thing, but it is like just a great listen, and that counts for a lot with me. Grebeberg is the latest full length from Samoth, and this is a very extreme black metal band that have been around for quite a long time, and they always find a way to put more energy into each record. There's always more thought put into each record, and keeping that classic extreme metal feeling alive through their their performances. I really enjoy the drummer from this band who's been on the last few records, and I think that's added a little bit of fire to what they're doing. But also, the classic sound of the band seems to change and shift depending on what narrative and what interest they have that went into this record or each of their records. So there's a lot of their discography that's worth digging into. There's a lot of really fantastic records in their discography, and so I've been impressed by this band for a long time. But getting someone who just doesn't like what is the in for people, I think that if you are a fan of anything from Marduk to melodic black metal, there's something there for you that maybe will feel a little bit more epic, a little bit more emergent. Like Early Immortal might be a nice thought to have when you approach this record. Um, so worth checking out, especially if you're interested in going back in their history or the history they cover with this record, which is pretty impressive. So always a recommendation for me with this band. Claustrum is the debut album from Claustrum, an Italian death metal band who are decidedly atmospheric, old school influenced, and certainly fairly unique in both their aesthetic and approach. This is a sort of off color, off topic sort of death metal record, which was both a pandemic record in earnest and a respite away from the chaos of all that, which turned into a very unpredictable modern death metal record, which is not modern sounding in terms of sounding like it's been made by a computer, so much as it is suffering from a little bit of ADHD, where there's a lot of detail packed into each song, and they go where they go, and it's sort of like the river flows downward, and wherever it falls on the rocks, they've recorded. And I think that's made it an exciting record to listen to repeatedly. And their style is classic, but different. So a unique band worth watching in the future. And this is not a big ask. It's a pretty short record, which has a lot packed into it. So you can approach at your own speed. The Storm Within is the latest full length from Saturnus, a Danish melodic death doom metal band, and probably one that has leaned into more of a gothic style in the past, but nothing so self indulgent that it was grotesque or uncomfortable. This is just a very poetic and expressive band that have always kept the death metal alive in their sound, and they've never gone full on just plain melodic metal. And the gothic stuff is limited to, poetic readings on certain records. So this record is particularly about the hook. It is definitely something you'll enjoy if you're a fan of October Tide, November's Doom, and that ilk. So there's a very classic feeling to what they do. And I think that the vocalist has made sure that they keep it aggressive and they keep it well-rounded, and something that should appeal to the classic fan who's been following them from the late 90s until now, but clarifies their identity a little bit more, because they've been a little bit all over the place with each record, evolving quite a bit with different members with each one. So this is a representative record and a very enjoyable record. So sometimes I wish that I wrote just single sentence reviews, but I don't know how, save that for social media, I guess. But End of the Vaticide by Black Eucharist is basically this band's kind of sophisticated uptick on what bands like Profanatica do, and there's no way to like dress that up to the level that I might want to. But if you appreciate the black metal that emerged from death metal in the United States in the late 80s and early 90s, as black death metal kind of became a more common pursuit, then you understand why you'd compare this to Demoncy or Profanatica in terms of the aggressive death metal register that they bring to black metal. And the distinction is there for you to parse, but this is not the bass-driven thumping of earlier Profanatica. It is probably a little bit later of a reference, and very refined recording, very enjoyable to listen, very kind of meat and potatoes feeling moment to moment. But there's a lot of attitude packed into this thing, and I think it just makes it entertaining. So it's a classic sound, and definitely worth giving a chance to see if it sticks. And of course, the themes are enjoyable as well. So finally, we get Soul Grinders, Filth Encrusted. Now, this is our second full-length album. This is a Portland, Oregon-based trio who definitely have a thrash metal sound. And earlier on, it was a little bit more of a slow-motion, sludgy death metal influenced classic thrash sort of thing. And they've incorporated more classic heavy rock and early 80s heavy metal and speed metal feeling to their sound, which has helped to refine their songwriting to things that are just basically like arena level thrashers that are kind of, wiped over with the grime of nuclear thrash metal. And uh, it's a very charismatic, enjoyable sort of mid-paced metal record with strong thrash metal influences. And, if you're a fan of like Holy Moses, but you want something that's a little bit more refined beyond their mid 80s to kind of late 80s turn. This has that feeling in a lot of respects, and it has that sort of grime to it that's I enjoyed. So that's worth checking out. I had a lot of other things to choose from as the final thing. I think that was just a very tuneful and cool thing. But check out Thorn of Fire's record. I think that one was very overlooked. Um, Order of Decay. Check that out if you like Crypts. And Hate Manifesto's record is a pretty important record for me this month. I thought it was something I listened to quite a bit, but I didn't. I wanted to put other things first, and I wasn't sure on the exact release date. So, a lot of honorable mentions to check out this month, but overall, not a bad month.